Greetings from Castle Goring, from Nikki, Aurora, and from me. Well, today I have an announcement because I mentioned that I was doing a taping of Prince William's possible non-attendance at Mass before he was due to show up or not. And indeed, he showed up at St. Mary Magdalene at Sandringham for Mass on Easter. Easter. Oh, Sunday. sorry. And I am delighted to see that he showed up because it shows me yet again how sound, solid, and intelligent both William and Catherine are. Now, anybody who knows anything about the royal family will know that not all members of it are sound and solid and sensible, but William certainly is. And I'm going to let you into a little secret that I have been told. That as far as William is concerned, the gloves are off. He is not going to be getting down in the mire and the mud and the muck and throwing anything at Harry, but the gloves are off. The relationship is completely finished. He evidently regards Harry as having committed the greatest of the cardinal sins that Harry used to pitch everybody out on his or her heir for whenever they were disloyal to him. And of course, Harry has been supremely disloyal in many ways, shapes, and forms, which I'm not going to go into now. And another proof of the pudding is in the eating, that William has appointed Jason Knopf to be the head of the Earthshot Prize, which is his great legacy thing. And Mickey's my great legacy. But it's his great legacy. Or so he thinks at the moment. So I just say all of that for what it's worth. And now we will plunge in with what Wake Up People has to say. I am an African American, and I know exactly what Meghan's children would look like. The children and her child would be what we call a Harfican. I've never heard of that one before. And would look nothing like any of those children. I know hundreds, and skin tone and hair will tell the true story. She used a surrogate. Did a deep dive, and she couldn't bear children. I don't know if you have noticed, but in the last day or two, Meghan and Harry have posted a clip dated the 4th of April 2021, when she is clearly heavier than she had been before, with an enormous belly. This was 2 months before the delivery of Lili. I am told that they are absolutely horror-struck at the way things have turned out for them. They're really very concerned about their ability to keep the big bucks coming in. And of course, now that she's gone back on social media, she is going to be rebutting every criticism that anybody has made. The problem with that tape, it's of her, it's of Doria, it's of Harry, and it's short, but it's supposed to give the message that she indeed did produce Lili. Of course, we all know that the weight Meghan gained during Archie's gestational period took place after Archie's birth, to coincide with Archie's delivery and thereafter. Was she building up for another lactation period? I mean, all the rebuttals that Meghan posts actually invite more questions than they answer. You know, remember in the Netflix series when they posted the scan of the putative Archie, but without the identifying features of the mother. So, were they aware of the fact that there would be questions asked? Because they were certainly aware of the fact that questions had been asked about Archie. She had, of course, gone to the lengths of altering, shall I say, amending Archie's birth certificate. And she is now down the line, several years down the line, 4 years down the line, almost to the day, posting a clip that is supposed to silence any observations that have been made about the fact that she might not have actually been the vehicle that delivered both those babies. And even if she were able to convincingly show, and I say if, and there could be no question of the fact that she carried Lili, it doesn't alter the questions about Archie. The tangled web we weave when we set out to deceive. No matter which way you look at it, this whole scenario is sick, 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 destructive, 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 damaging, damaging, damaging. It shouldn't be taking place. All she needs to do is provide the verifiable medical evidence that she gave birth to those two children and that they were born of her eggs. And then the whole problem disappears. But of course, with it would disappear the speculation. And I suspect Meghan enjoys the speculation. Meghan, I think, is a total attention-seeking junkie who will do anything to remain on people's tongues, so to speak. Michelle Dillon says, Hi Lacey, hope you and your family had a blessed Easter Sunday. We did, thank you very much. I'd like to say that we British Sikhs are not happy at all with being overlooked by King Charles III. Personally, I don't think it's right that Chuck Some of you people are so funny. Chuck goes out of his way to highlight Islam at every opportunity, while ignoring all the other faiths in his country. He needs to go back to basics, highlight Christianity and no other religion. By highlighting Islam at every turn, it just makes people of other faiths wonder why he is showing particular favoritism to Islam while ignoring the rest of us. I hope you're able to read this comment out, as I don't believe the king is considering fairly the wishes of all his subjects in this regard. It is offensive. Just be the defender of the faith, not selective faiths that suit the current government of the day. Best wishes. Well, Michelle Dillon, I have read it out. I have read it out because what you say has a great deal of merit. There has been a resurgence of interest in the Christian faith, and people are really very, very annoyed by the fact that Easter has come and gone, and from its beginning to its end, the only drum the king could beat was the drum of Islam. Well, as I said the other day, not totally, because he did allude to faith, hope, and love. But I get your point and I agree with it. And so I have read this out because hopefully if maybe people make their point and make their opinions clear, maybe he will actually take on board what they say. But let me point out that in the meantime, Islam is becoming an extremely potent force in this country's government. We have a Muslim mayor of London. There are many mayors who are Muslim, including in Brighton, if I am not mistaken. I had the pleasure of meeting him, and he was an absolutely delightful man, and he was not at all the sort of person that you could ever criticize for anything. I thought he was marvelous. I posted something about him some time ago. But, monarchies shouldn't try to be too far ahead of the curve. And they shouldn't try to be too anticipatory, because the curve is like a fad. In life you have a choice. You're either going to be a stylist or you are going to be a fashionista. If you are a stylist, you go for style. So you go for durability over temporary trends. On the other hand, if you are a fashionista, you are trying to stay ahead of the curve. I'm not sure that's such a good idea for a monarch or a monarchy. C.T. Saiter says, Lady C, I so enjoy your historical detours. So do I. Thank you. Glad you do. They're both fun and illuminating. Thank you. I also appreciate when you speak about social class, as it's something of a taboo topic here in America. Pretty taboo here too. I don't mind addressing taboos, incidentally. We like to believe we're all middle class, regardless of the reality. Would you mind expanding a bit on what you mean by bourgeois or arriviste? I gather the general sense, especially in your comments about a certain duchess's arriviste taste, but I'd love to hear more about how you define those terms in the British or European context of class, manners, and taste. Many thanks for your insights and hope you had a blessed Holy Week. I did. Lovely. So did the girls. Okay. I think this is an interesting topic, especially as how it's normally verboten on the one hand or addressed by ignoramuses on the other. So I'm actually delighted to plunge in on it. The word bourgeois means middle class in French. So if you say something is bourgeois, it is that it's middle class, which is a big distinction from being aristocratic. But the aristocracy don't go around saying, oh, that's so aristocratic. Or, I mean, you might say things like, oh, it's very you, or very one of us, or it's very, I mean, there are loads of ways of making the point without saying it's aristocratic. Now, the royal way is not always the aristocratic way. The royal way is sometimes resolutely bourgeois because they are pandering to what they hope will be their supporters, while the aristocracy, by and large, is perfectly happy to continue with its traditions. And it doesn't mind that it is making distinctions between itself and other social groups. Let's put it that way. When you say something is bourgeois, it can be a terrible put down. When you say something is arriviste, it's invariably a dreadful put down. It means that people have arrived new to the game. They don't know how to behave. They don't know what the code is. They don't know how to dress. They don't know what words to avoid and what phrases to avoid. Now, if you're mixing in the world at large, which the royals are, to an extent, they have to break bounds. And members of the aristocracy who are also functioning in the world at large, they will often break bounds. There are certain things that they, by and large, do not say, such as, well, the young do, but the older ones would never say back in the day. Never. By and large, there are all sorts of little rules and nuances that they're too trivial and they're too plentiful to go into. I mean, Nancy Mitford wrote a book on this subject, so I don't think it's something that can be covered too briefly. Let's put it that way. But if you're going to be vulgar and you're aristocratic, you're doing it in a splendid way. You're not going to be vulgar because you're making a point of what fine taste you have. You're going to be vulgar because you're making the point that you are grand enough to break the rules and it suits you to break them, and you're going to break them, and you do break them. So sometimes the behavior coincides, but from a different starting point, and the end product is always different as well. It's a matter of taste, manners. I mean, I'll use an example. Only well-read people who set out to impress you constantly do so because they have a massive chip on their shoulder, which means that they have a personal problem, because some do. But they don't. The Meghans of this world set out to impress you with how great and grand they are. And what they do at every turn is ratify how mean and how anything but grand they are. Because people who are genuinely, from having been brought up to be properly behaved, understand that unless there's something wrong with them personally, which means that they're going to let themselves down at every turn, they're not going to let the side down, because they're not going to be vulgar and they're not going to be hectoring you with how great and grand they are. I mean, Meghan's perpetual stance of, look at me, I'm so classy, is the absolute antithesis of the message she's trying to deliver. Because every time she does it, the message she delivers is how unclassy she is, if there's such a word. So, I don't know if I've answered the question to the best of my, well, I've answered it to the best of my ability at the moment, but I don't know if I have been as clear as I hope I've been. So if you'd like me to expand upon it some other time, please let me know. A.V. Tote says, I don't think anyone at Netflix has such scorn for the monarchy that they won't then tormented by Meghan. You're quite wrong, my dear A.V. Tote. Or Toth, I'm not sure which one it is. Quite wrong. Netflix couldn't give a continental damn about tormenting the royals or having such scorn for the monarchy. They think that the monarchy is a perpetually established fact of life that they are going to be able to milk to the full extent of their desires for as long as it is commercially viable, and the monarchy will remain undamaged as a result of this. This is a misnomer. This is the sort of mistake that Tsar Nicholas II made when he thought his prestige was so totally unassailable that he could take over when the First World War was not going well for Russia, and become the commander-in-chief. And he shoved aside Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, who was very popular, and he became the chief of staff. Bad error, because then all failures were heaped on his shoulders. But he thought his prestige was so inviolate that nothing could ever dent it. And I see an awful lot of that attitude, not only with Netflix and people who jump on the bandwagon of the monarchy and of royalty and think, oh, We can be as mischievous, we can be as irresponsible, we can be as inventive, we can be as destructive as we want, because they are never going to be affected. That's not true. First of all, they're human beings and they are affected. Secondly, the institution itself can and is affected, and sometimes to its detriment, other times to its actual enhancement. Because Harry and Meghan's conduct, for instance, has simply made the monarchy more interesting. Yes, a lot of people are mightily fed up that the saga continues and that they've not got their comeuppance yet, but they are getting it, and they're getting it on a daily basis. So people should actually be grateful for small mercies and understand that death by 1,000 cuts doesn't come with one big slash. It comes with 1,000 cuts. That's why it's called what it's called. Ancient Chinese fact of life. Because, of course, it was a Chinese invention. But we're not speaking about it literally, we're speaking about it figuratively. And not only Netflix, but much of the media doesn't only scorn the royals and the monarchy because it offends we want somebody we have voted for. We want David Beckham for president, or the latest flying pig. But we want to have a say. There's that aspect to it, but there's also another aspect to it, which is that, as I said a bit earlier, they all think that it's indestructible, but everything in life is destructible. And they have a lot of scorn for not only the monarchy, but old money and people who are privileged, who, especially the aristocracy, because they think that these are segments of the population who are basically dehumanized because they have been dehumanized by the media. 50 years ago, boosted to the sky and dehumanized with deification, now dehumanized with mockery and with denigration and with envy. Oh, look at them. They're so great and grand. They've not had to work for anything. Well, indeed, anybody who has anything has to work to keep it. Let me tell you, that's a fact. So I think on that point, we should not belabor it any further. What do you think for the moment? Michelle Law says, Lady C, I saw a video that the Sussex Squad has turned on the Sussexes. News Nation is the source here in the US. Apparently, Archewell has stopped funding a women's group. Very interesting. I don't want my opinion booted from YouTube. I don't belong to X, TikTok, or Instagram, so I cannot verify. Thank you, Michelle. Sorry. Well, Harry and Meghan have been having money issues, and they're going to continue. They never earned the money that they were alleging they earned, and their earning capacity has diminished considerably and is due to diminish even further. So, if the Sussex members of the Sussex Squad have turned on them, so much the better, because the Sussex Squad have turned out to be the most poisonous, vicious, nasty group that the public has been treated to. They could have taught Joseph Goebbels and Streicher a thing or two about being really vicious and nasty and untruthful and irresponsible in their inventions and condemnations and their inhumanity. And they have also been very, very creative, because they have often manipulated situations and invented scenarios to do absolute damage to people who they felt were not in favour of their deities, Meghan and Harry. Really, Meghan. Sister Love says, Lady C, I saw your post on X about the Pope's death. I found it very moving, and as a Catholic, I'm wondering what you make of it. If you have views on doubtless strong views. Something went wrong here. I'm not quite sure what went wrong. But so I just go with the question as I think it should be, because something seems to have happened with the transposition of the original to this. Well, Francis is dead. He was 88. No age nowadays. I know people of 86 who are vigorous, but it's unfortunate. I thought he was a good man. I have to say, I thought he was a little bit too political at times, but I thought he was very open-minded. Some people would have thought too open-minded, as the late Rajmata of Jaipur used to say, be careful that you're not so open-minded that your brains spill out onto the street. Well, I thought he was a good man. I thought that he was very in tune with Christ's message of that we are all imperfect, that let him who is without sin cast the first stone, that he was extremely tolerant of human foibles. I didn't see anything wrong with that. I did think he was sometimes a little bit too much on he missed the part where Christ said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God which that is God's. I think he was a little bit too activistic in trying to engineer social change, when I do not actually think it was totally in tune with the best interests of the papacy, which should be to try to achieve positive social change without being an activist. Because, as Jesus said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. Jesus was saying, life is imperfect. We're all imperfect. Life's never going to be perfect. Do what you can to be as good a person as you are. And Jesus wasn't saying, don't try to change the system for the better. What he was saying is, accept the system as it is and make the best of it in the context. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Jesus was about respect. So I felt, but I thought he was a good man. I had the great honour and privilege of being received in a private audience by Pope John Paul II, who is, of course is now a saint. And he's the only human being I have ever met, and I've met an awful lot of people, in whose presence I was aware that I was in the presence of greatness. I've met many people with great positions, but I wouldn't have said that I ever felt, except with him, that I was in the presence of greatness. But with him, I did. And he spoke to us for a considerable length of time about the duality of his role, walking in St. Peter's shoes on the one hand, and being the head of, and the sovereign, the head of a secular state, and being the sovereign of really what is the world's greatest institution, because the Catholic Church is the largest and therefore the greatest institution in the whole wide world. And I felt that he understood the duality and embraced it. And it's to a large extent thanks to John Paul II that the world ceased, the world that was communist ceased being communist. And I felt that this was something lacking in Pope Francis. But that doesn't mean he wasn't a good man. Let us see who they come up with. Dorothy Grace says, the Prime Minister wants 16-year-olds to have the vote. Virginia Giuffre was 17 or more when these assertions against Prince Andrew occurred. The debacle over the Southpaw killings was about a 17-year-old. Make up your mind, Sir Keir, about the age of maturity where responsibility begins. Very good point. First of all, 16-year-olds should not be given the vote. If you're too young to drink, you're too young to vote. Right there. Of course, Starmer wants 16-year-olds to vote because when people are young, they are far more amenable to the desire for change without understanding the consequences of change. You know, they're more idealistic. Young people are more idealistic, and they're more unrealistically idealistic. Unless they are fanatics, people, as they get older, become less idealistic and less amenable to the temptation of thinking that we are ever going to be a perfect world and that nirvana can exist. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't all strive for an improvement in society, because I think we all should. But I think we should also be aware that as things stand at the moment, and for the last half a century, there have been so many advances made in terms of lifestyle, in terms of physical and material comforts. Most relatively humble people nowadays I'm not speaking about the truly disadvantaged, incidentally, but most working class people have a standard of living that most upper class people, even with staff, would have regarded as mind-bogglingly fortunate 2 and 3 centuries ago. We have very little appreciation, and for the tremendous advances that have been made in terms of our way of life and the progress of our civilization. And you keep on getting people who are hungry for political influence and power saying, oh, you're so disadvantaged. Life is worse than it's ever been. It's absolutely untrue. Absolutely untrue. And people only need to read a history book or two and open their eyes to see. But of course, Starmer wants 16-year-olds to vote, so he can tell them all sorts of rubbish and that they will then give him the vote. And the Labour Party has gone to some considerable lengths to gerrymander the electorate. Let us see what happens. Let's leave it at that. And we will end with what a vain rock says. Dearest Lady C, greetings. With respect to the revelations regarding the Sentebale charity, I wondered about the following. 1. Dr. Chandorka stated that the original venue for the polo match, and this is really interesting because Vain Rock has come at this from a totally different angle from anyone else. That the original venue for the polo match had to be changed due to Harry's sudden plans to bring the Netflix crew. That seems to imply, for Harry, Netflix's attendance at the charity match was non-negotiable. Absolutely. Otherwise, might he not have simply resolved and agreed that in Sentebale's financial interest, he would not bring the Netflix crew? It's a fine point, but to me, it reiterates his own base self-interest and mercenary intent. Clearly, prior to the polo match and the events that occurred on the stage with Meghan, the seeds of discord had been sown. Absolutely right. It became totally, and I'm going to answer this one before reading the second question. Sorry. The seeds of discord had been sown, yes, but I think there were other seeds of discord because there have been reports coming out of South Africa, disturbing reports about the fact that people on the ground were not being supported the way they should have been, that a lot of the money raised was not going to the people who should have been receiving the money, but it was going to sustain workforces. In other words, it was jobs for the boys. Very, very unacceptable. But where Harry's insistence that Netflix be involved is concerned, it shows what his priorities were. The main purpose of the event was to have Netflix avail itself of the presence of the entertainment that the polo players and the polo playing event, the excuse of Sentebale was giving them. It's obvious, because otherwise Harry would have said, oh, if we have to move, oh, why don't we simply just stay here? But no, it created absolute turmoil, I am informed. And it would create turmoil to have to move an event at the 99th hour. I know, because I've organised events. I'm organising one on the 5th of July here. And that's here. If I had to change the venue, it would cause huge problems. And they had to change the venue late in the game. It shows where Harry's priorities lay. Let's leave it at that. And the second part of the question is, my understanding is that each polo player requires, on average, 4 to 8 horses per match. Would Harry and any other West Coast players have trailered or shipped their stable of horses to Florida? If so, would Sentebale be billed for those costs? What about the numerous horse grooms and their attendant expenses, including salaries, travel, and accommodation costs? Given your experience with charity fundraising, would Sentebale have had to cover those expenses? Polo is a prohibitively expensive pastime for the very wealthy, and is perhaps, in the context of the 21st century, not a very good or affordable look for a charity. Kind regards, Vane Rock. Vane Rock, brilliant point. Horses can be flown. They don't have to be transported in horse boxes. And certainly to transport that number of horses across from the west coast of the United States, fairly north, because California is, well, it's maybe not that north, but it's definitely gonna be more north than the tip of Florida. So, and you're not only transporting it north to south, but you're transporting it west to east. So you're doing an awful lot of transportation. I actually have not checked to see how they did it. And I thought, I'm not going to check to see how they did it. Because if I did that, it would compromise one or two people whose positions cannot be compromised. So I'm going to answer the question without particular knowledge of the facts. But overall knowledge is that just as how Harry proved that he had to move the venue when the cost of the venue went up, because he wasn't getting the venue free. It was at a reduced charity rate that the original venue was being hired in at. That would have been a cost to Sentebale. I mean, for instance, when I have an event here, I give the castle, so they don't have to pay for the castle. If I'm giving it to a charity, I give it. That's not what happened with Sentebale and the polo ground. It was going to be hired at a charity rate. Now, charity rates are lower than commercial rates, but they are still commercially valuable for the venue, because the venue obviously has costs. It has to maintain the place, it has to clean it, it has to set things up. So there are all sorts of costs that the venue itself would not be absorbing. And when it becomes a commercial enterprise, the cost goes way up. So that's why it had to be moved so somewhere where Harry was able to get a mates rates, it's called, mates rates. If they were using their own polo ponies, and now I'm going to speak from experience as opposed to actual knowledge on this particular subject, and I'm doing it for, as I said, to make sure that I don't create problems for anybody down the line. Obviously, the horses are flown. They're transported wherever they need to be. They need grooms. They need attendants. I mean, it's a huge operation. And it's a lot of horses. It's a lot of labor. Polo is an extremely labor-intensive sport. You can borrow horses, but even there, it would be very unusual for anybody to lend their polo ponies for a match that was going to be televised and used as a commercial vehicle for Harry and Meghan to drive their profits to the bank. Then, of course, there's the accommodation of everybody involved. Do you begin to see that it is a rich man's sport that is very expensive even for rich people, I've got to tell you. I have friends who are polo players, and they complain about the price of everything. But they love the sport, and so they do it. But Harry and Meghan, I think, Vain Rock, you're on to something. And it begins to show why Sophie Chandorka came out punching to the extent that she did, and quite frankly, with the resoluteness that she did. So I think this is incidentally a saga that is not going to disappear into the ether anytime soon. But we will get back to it as and when it is appropriate. And on that note, I'll say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please keep the questions and comments coming in so I will know what you would like us to be speaking about. Okay, thank you so much. Take good care and Godspeed. And if you have truly enjoyed this, would you care to like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell? A bientôt. Bye-bye.